of the TRC, thematic hearings on economic crimes. This afternoon, to begin with, shall we all stand to administer the oath?
Before you proceed, I was thinking of the class. You were trying to say something?
No, I wasn't sure we were on the air.
When we on the air? No. This is closed just for TRC purposes.
To the TRC of Liberia is the truth. Nothing but the whole truth. So,
Please be seated.
On behalf of the Commission, we want to welcome and extend to you our appreciation and gratitude for you honoring our invitation to come and help us with the tax the Liberian people have assigned us. The TRC was established to give some meaning to the conflict we had. A lot of us are still confused about why we had a conflict in the first place, what happened, and as a nation and people, what do we need to do in order for us to move forward away from the path of violence and the kind of conflict we experienced. And because of that, the TRC was established to do just that. And part of our approach is to review the very past we're talking about. And instead of just relying on resource documents and all of that, a lot of us Liberians who were active during that period, either in private service or public service, are still around. And we attach more value to the testimony and information of people who are alive. And that is why we are inviting Liberians from all spheres of life, in the military, in the political, in the financial and economic sector as well. We've invited you because we are doing an investigation on economic activities of the government during the period, private companies during the period, private citizens during the period, as well as public institutions. And a number of information have come to us which relates to the activities of the Ministry of Finance at the time. And some of them more specifically to your office as Deputy Minister for Revenue. So we thought that it would be unfair for us to just draw conclusions if we do not hear from you who were the minister at the time. So basically it's against that background that we have invited you. And like I said, we are very happy that we have honored the citation and you are here today. So please welcome again.
thank you.
Okay. I want to take this time to introduce commissioners, and following that I will do, before you make your presentation, I will do the line of some of what we have collected to date, just for your information, and then so that in your statement you can say one or two about it if you care to. These are private hearings of the Commission. If you prefer that it be broadcast live, we can do that. But it's the choice of the Commission that we do this just for the purpose of the Commission and not for public consumption. Commissioner Omosida sits at the end on my left. Commissioner Gerald Coleman, he is oversighting these activities on economic crimes of the Commission. Commissioner Burr Brown-Boo and Commissioner John Stewart will be coming. He left a while ago. And I'm Jerome Verdia. We say welcome again. I'd just like to go over some of what we have, like I've said before. One issue has to do with a company called Natura. Natura is a logging company represented by Costco and Hoban. We understand he obtained a certified statement of account from the Ministry of Finance and FDA to the tune of $2 million tax credit from the government of Liberia around July 17, 2000. Then there is an issue of the Rights Stabilization Fund. Just in case if you have any idea of it, we heard since the 80s this fund was established, and it continued even during the period of President Taylor. And it was meant to stabilize the rice market, but to date, there's no information on how the funding was used or where it's being deposited. Any information if you have that you can share with us. We understand that Tradeco Bank was a depository bank, and the Ministry of State for Presidential Affairs controlled that account, but it is not reliable information as yet. Then duties on petroleum products. From information we gathered from others at the Ministry of Finance, specifically Customs, is that all duties on petroleum products didn't go through Customs. We were wondering how duties on petroleum products are being handled, just in case if you have some information as well. And then we received information also that whilst you were a deputy minister, you single-handedly authorized the transfer of approximately $8 million in forestry revenues between July 1999 and July 2000. And that they were transferred to individual and not government accounts. We were hoping you would help us with that also. Then that up to now, the Ministry of Finance has no documentation on taxes paid by OTC to the government of Liberia for the entire period of its operation. And that OTC up to now is not a registered company in Liberia, and its withholding taxes and other corporate taxes are not well documented at the Ministry of Finance. Then another issue has to do with Lone Star. It is also our information up to 2003, Lone Star was not a registered corporation in Liberia, but that it claims to have a Liberian partnership owning 40% of its shares. The company is supposed to be PLC, but to date, we have not obtained any information in terms of registration of PLC. But it is our information that PLC is shared between President Taylor, former President Taylor, Imaiwa Shaw, and Benuna Ure, and that there is no evidence that this company has paid income taxes of any kind to the government. And we were hoping that as Minister for Revenue during that period, you also aid us whatever information you have. The panel of experts reported that you at one point in time, I think for a period of about 6 years, requested both Ure and Shaw to produce their tax returns, and they didn't comply. And according to records we've collected, the last time dividend was declared in favor of PLC was in 2006 in an amount of about $3 million. So basically that's the substance of what we have, and we'll also be happy if you have any additional information that could assist us in understanding how revenues and finances operated during that period from 1997, 96 up to 2003. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
And welcome. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Can we go through this item by item? Right. Now, the question of signing tax credits, the way the Revenue Department worked under my tenure, if you are a taxpayer and you got a tax bill, you proceeded to the central bank or whichever tax-paying commercial bank was collecting government revenue at the time. The payment was made directly to the bank, and the bank issued the official flag receipt that's for government. So my office then would only deal with the flag receipt. However, there were cases where monies were not paid to the bank, but were authorized, paid someplace else by the President of Liberia at the time directly. In the case of Natura, for example, the information we had from Natura is that there was some money being paid to the University of Liberia for transfer of facilities to the Fendale campus. Now, when that money gets paid, representatives from Natura came into the office and asked for flag receipts for their own internal auditing purposes. Well, naturally, I wouldn't give or authorize a flag receipt to be issued if I don't see any evidence of some authority higher than myself authorizing that payment to go where it had to go. Now, in that case, the President would confirm, and he did confirm. I believe, and I'm not really sure, that Natura was a forestry company or a forest area that was owned by the University of Liberia. And then also that this was an agreement was entered between the university and Goscovenhoven, and that can be verified by people at the university or a representative from Natura who was here at the time and who made the representations to my office. So based on confirmation from the President at the time, we issued the tax receipt acknowledging. And one of the reasons I needed to do that was because I needed to take in this revenue as part of our work in the Revenue Department. We can't, if we have an estimate for the month, for example, of $6 million intake, and $2 million got diverted someplace else, not due to any action on our part, but that money naturally would have come to the Liberian government, and it would be seen as revenue intake from my office. So I had to know where the money went, who authorized it, and then I would be in a position, in a position to issue a flag receipt. And so when we issued the Natura tax advance flag receipt of $2 million, it's not because we received money in the office or it was credited by the central bank, but it was because the owner of the company acknowledged that this payment had been authorized to someone, and he came in for the flag receipt to adjust his record, and that's how that was done. And the same thing, if you go further down on your list, referred to that $8 million you were talking to. The accounts, as I remember, were not in anybody's personal name, but we were informed, and actually, because I didn't know the nature of these questions, I didn't bring documents, but there was a document where former President Taylor actually listed where these amounts were going. In one case, it was payment for a Coast Guard vessel. In another case, it was payment for uniforms for the police. In another case, it was payment for, what was it for? A helicopter, I remember. So they were all listed, the reason for the payment, where it was transferred, it was all listed and initial on his hand. Now, the people who made these payments have their own corporate shareholders to answer to. They also had their auditors to answer to. So a record from my office in the Ministry of Finance acknowledging that this payment had been made as authorized by the President would help them on their side. At least that's the impression that I got. And so I authorized, in the case of OTC, for example, from Buchanan, the flag receipts there was signed by our tax collector there at the time. I don't remember his name, but he signed it and we authorized it. And in some cases, actually, we learned about the payments long after the payments were made. And I mean, since we're being truthful here, the payments may have been actually made in 2000 or 1999, but it didn't come to our attention till a couple years later. And then we had to authorize the receipt. And in order to regularize it with the date of actual payment, those payments were actually backdated to the date of the payment. Okay, so that would account for all of those accounts. We did not make any payments to any personal account. In the case of the police uniforms, there was actually a name, and I can provide you with a copy of that later on, of the company where this money was sent. Now, Natura was a local payment that was made, and maybe someone from the university can acknowledge it. But certainly, the representative of the company is still here, and his name is Mark Kishan, and he can follow up on that for you. He was representing Natura at the time, and he was the one who interacted with my office generally, yeah. The next one, the Rice Stabilization Fund was not collected by my office, and we did not acknowledge any of those receipts. Between the Ministry of Agriculture and the Ministry of Commerce, these funds were collected. In a case where advance payment was made, as in customs duty with rice, which was 50 cents per 100-pound bag, or even customs duty, as you mentioned, on petroleum products, there were instances where letters were actually received from the Ministry of State for Presidential Affairs, acknowledging, for example, that K&K had made a payment to the Ministry of Presidential Affairs, and K&K wanted his flag receipt because my tax officers would go after him. Okay, and either the flag receipt or the letter. And officially, it will be the flag receipt that will acknowledge that so-and-so amount had been received by the Minister of State for Presidential Affairs. Generally, those letters were signed by the Minister of State at the time, Jonathan Taylor. And then we would issue a flag receipt to K&K for customs duty. But the Rice Stabilization Fund, which was controlled by Commerce and Agriculture, was not really under my purview. Right. Customs duty, yeah, that refers to the rice account. Petroleum products, in a lot of cases, the normal procedure would be to just make your payment according to the rules through the bank. We'll hold up the products until the flag receipt was taken to the customs officer. And that's where the Commissioner of Customs would come in. They were not, it's too specific to say they were not handled by customs. There were cases where they were indeed handled by customs where we made them pay. Personally, I ran a tight ship, and if we didn't get evidence that you paid somebody, some authorized person, either meaning it would come through the executive mansion, if we didn't get evidence that payment had been made, then we just closed up the operation until we got it. And under that kind of pressure, they would either bring a letter from the Ministry of State, and then we would issue the flag receipt acknowledging, yes, that money had been made. Now, we were responsible for funding the budget in a certain manner. We didn't handle any cash in my office. You went to the bank, you paid your money, and then you brought the flag receipt. And that flag receipt, our tax officers then would calculate what is received on the flag receipt and add it in and take it in as revenue. And that would build up my revenue from 1 million to 1.2 million or something like that. In the absence of any acknowledgement that payment had been made to the government of Liberia, that would mean then I have a revenue shortfall. And so the flag receipts were issued, and it got to the point where we were dealing with a situation called non-cash, meaning cash did not come through the revenue department into the central bank account. Non-cash meaning that one way or the other the money was paid, but not through the regular channel. So we had a special reporting system for that. And the flag receipts actually should not have been issued by anyone in the office unless it's authorized and you had a supporting document to say that someone has received the money or the money had been paid. So the non-cash issue got to be a second line where certain revenues were actual physical cash that could be verified for the bank, and other revenue, because we didn't handle it and the bank didn't handle it, so we issued a cash to acknowledge that yes, it had gone either to the executive mansion or that the president had authorized the sending of this money somewhere else. And it was always, they had justification for it. 2 million, for example, to the University of Liberia is justified if the president acknowledges it and signs it. Then then you give the taxpayer a receipt to acknowledge that he had paid his obligation. Silas, yeah, cool. Okay, we addressed the revenue and OTC, where they were authorized to pay for various items that were ordered by the government. And that would more or less handle that, the forestry related taxes, especially to OTC. OTC had paid so much money through direct authorization from the president that at one point we had to go to Buchanan and run after them to pay their vehicle license just so we could get some cash from them. And we got some motor vehicle license, driver's licenses, because they had a lot of foreign workers there, mostly Malaysian. And we also had to go after them for things like work permits and all this sort of thing. But they had a special relationship with the president's office, and so we couldn't really go after them in the normal tax way. You go after them, you find out that we have already paid so much, and we have already paid so much. So my office, to record all of those payments, we issued these flag receipts, and if you look in the revenue report, we took it in as revenue coming into the government of Liberia. Right. So that would be OTC. With the corporate taxes, I think it's still on the books that companies that are investing over a certain amount of X million dollars into the country get corporate tax exemption as the investment incentive. And OTC, not having operated for more than, I don't think they had reached the 5-year limit. And a lot of the other companies, they had corporate tax exemptions, so corporate tax filing did not apply. And those concession agreements should still be filed with the Ministry of Finance. Whether OTC was registered or not, I doubt if OTC would have operated in the country without some kind of corporate registration document. And I think they might still have copies of those. So if the documents would not be filed in the Ministry of Finance, but they would be filed in the Ministry of Commerce, because they registered the business, and of course the articles of incorporation are always filed with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. We had a copy of the concession agreement that they had exemption from a lot of taxes. concession agreement signed by the President and the NIC at the time, the National Investment Commission, so they weren't interested. But withholding taxes on dividends, they were entitled to pay. Withholding taxes for their employees, there were some payments recorded. And let me see, Lone Star, same case. They had to have some kind of corporate registration and business registration with the Ministry of Commerce. Otherwise, the commerce official wouldn't have allowed them to operate. Lone Star corporate taxes, we have records of taxes that were left at the Ministry of Finance. If they disappeared, then I don't understand. But in any case, Lone Star itself should have their own records, because we always warn taxpayers that when you make your payment, make sure that you have the record of your tax payment, because record keeping in a situation, government situation, was very difficult. The tax administration was also not what we would like it to be. I understand now everything is computerized and that makes it easy. But for tax administration purposes, we were not really equipped to follow up on tax payments. Computerization would have made it easier. So we insist, and we used to put out revenue newsletters asking taxpayers to please keep your tax receipts, keep the record. And people generally did. So I think as far as corporate payments from Lone Star, they should have a record of that. They have a record. Unless they were giving particular exemption at the time. PLC investment, I've never heard of it. 40% share in Lone Star. Ministry of Finance. Lone Star recognized, but PLC investment I'd never heard of, and if you will look at all the records when I was there, this company name never showed up. Okay. There were other companies who paid dividends, for example, but I don't remember dividends coming in by Lone Star. And it could be, and I would be guessing that they also have one of those investment incentive contracts that we give them corporate tax exemption for the normally first 5 years of operation. Tax returns issued to Shaw and Urey to produce tax returns. We probably did. We sent out tax returns notice to everyone, especially around the end of March when the tax filing date was due by April 15th. So we reminded all taxpayers, individuals as well as corporations, that the tax time was due. We put out general notices in the papers, which is still done, that tax payments were due. The panel of experts. I don't know what to say. I told the panel of experts that I haven't met the panel of experts. PLC. The last recorded payment was $3.2 million in 2006. Well, I wasn't there in 2006, so I really don't know about that. I left the Ministry of Finance in 2003, October. Excuse me. The period of Ministry of Finance? When was I there? 1997, September to November 2003. Bureau of Maritime Affairs, it's fairly straightforward. The Bureau of Maritime Affairs worked under the commissioner, but I was concerned with the revenue. And what usually happens, the money from maritime operations from ITC at the time, and later on this other company, they always credited the bank account. And then what they would do is send us bank advice to say, for example, on such and such a date, $50,000 was credited to the government from the maritime account. Please issue a flag receipt. then we would issue a flag receipt from our office. But later on, I thought that this is the most inefficient way to do it since the bank already had flag receipts. So we asked the bank to issue the flag receipts directly when the maritime funds came in and just send us a copy of the receipt. And that's how we took in the revenue. We recorded the revenue from those receipts and took it in and made it part of the revenue report for that month or that period. All right. So and then we tried to coordinate. What we tried to do was to balance the report out, and we tried to coordinate. For example, we get several flag receipts from the bank, and that's the money we will record as revenue. And then we wanted to make sure that the Bureau of Maritime Affairs also had the same figure. Generally, the figures differ, but from my office, we could only report what the bank gave us on the bank advice slip. All right. So we would attempt to see the Commissioner of the Bureau of Revenue to make sure that we were singing out of the same hymn book, so to speak, that we were recording the same figures. Generally, the figures differ, and then we try to go after what the difference was and where did it go and should it be part of our revenue. And, you know, if we were told it wasn't part of the revenue, we just didn't record it. Because I can't record something that I didn't see evidence of, so I didn't record it. Wire transfers made by government of Liberia. I'm sorry I can't help you on that because payments made for the government was under the Deputy Minister for Expenditure. Yeah, so when we got the money in and sent in our report, we informed through revenue reports, monthly revenue reports, all of the government agencies, which would be the Budget Bureau, where we got copies to them, copies to the Executive Mansion, of course, copies to the Minister of Finance and the Minister for Expenditure. And then they would try to balance, when we had to balance the account, whatever they spent against whatever was received. But the wire transfer out of the country, I was a signature to the account only in so much as one of the signing signatures isn't there, but usually the signature was the Minister of Expenditure and the Comptroller's Office. Now, in the absence of one of those, then I would be requested to sign a check. But other than that, and then I would sign once they have gone through the usual PGA process, the Deputy Comptroller and all of that, and then by the time they brought it to me, then I signed it in the absence of one of the authorized signatures. So, sir, I'm looking at a document here. Natura and the Ministry of Finance, yes. What was the signature? You will see on these credits that there are 3 signatures on these credits, so it wouldn't be just my signature as the Deputy Minister for Revenue. It's very faint, so I don't know who that first signature is. Yes, I do. Yes, I do. Yeah, the FDA also signed, yeah. That's the FDA signature. I don't know about corresponding to Charles Taylor personal bank account. I do know that what I was told was that this money had been paid, and the impression I got was that Natura being the forestry reserve for the University of Liberia, and I know that they had been trying to get some people to work that forest so that they could get some revenue. And I assumed that it was true, and that this money was going to go towards the Fendel campus move. If you remember, once all of the ministers had to go to Fendel campus just to clean it up, and it was around that time.
Anything else you came to say beyond the document? you have?
No, not really. We ran a fairly straightforward and fairly tight ship as far as dealing with the taxpayers and keeping records. The computer, I understand, that we used in the office was dismantled, but there was a lot of records there. And the gentleman who worked with me is now traveled to the States. So, and I don't like to take records home with me except for this one document where President Taylor has actually initialed his request for these receipts. And that's about the only one that I have. And sample letters of where we would write to the Deputy Minister for Expenditure, because we had a policy that nobody could get a check from the Ministry of Finance unless they got tax clearance from my office, because people were always bypassing. So whenever one of these things came up, like we were issuing credit to a logging company or any company for tax payment made, we would send a memo to the Deputy Minister for Expenditure so that he would know that this payment had been made. That's about it.
Thank you very much for responding to our inquiry. Commissioners will ask one or two questions, some of them for clarification or out of emphasis. But I want to start by asking, in what form did the President's authorization for these credits normally take? Telephone call, written documentation?
Well, there were telephone calls because, you know, they would, whenever the taxpayers, the tax officers go out and start to shut down operations, and they would do it on my authority, I would either get a phone call, and it was only the President's authority that I would recognize, unless the Minister of Finance had been instructed by the President to ask me to do it. But they would come, I mean, the whole group would come running in the office and say, we already paid this money, and now the people close the office down, and that kind of thing. I said, well, I don't know. And then I remember one incident where they said, yeah, the number call the President. I said, I don't call President. If he wants me to do something, let him, he can either call me or he would send a letter. And so I have this full list of about a total of about $12 million credit to OTC, where the payment had been authorized, and the detail of the payment is also listed, including what I have told you for specific purchases, such as a helicopter or uniforms or patrol boats kind of thing. But there were also situations where they said the money has been transferred, Government of Liberia account, Citibank, New York, or somewhere else. And in that case, you don't really know that the Citibank account may be in somebody's name rather than Government of Liberia. What you're going on is what's on the paper before you. If subsequently it has been discovered that this account was in somebody else's name other than what I thought I knew, then of course that was beyond my control.
So you had no way of verifying, or you had no authority to go beyond the President's word or instruction?
Well, what I'm saying to you is, in the case of these particular payments, by the time they got to me, they had already been made like 2 or 3 years earlier. And the reason they got to me was because there were auditors, after the company auditors, I guess, and shareholders, after the managers of these companies, because they had to report to somebody, and they wanted acknowledgement made that would that some authority in Liberia authorized them to do this against taxes. Okay, so the payments were made, and they had the flag receipts. In the case of OTC, their expediters who were after it wanted these for the for their tax auditors, and the payment had already been made much earlier, so there wasn't anything I could have done anyway to prevent it, and I don't know if I would have been able to.
But did your auditors go one step forward to verify whether these purchases were actually made? For example, uniform for police, helicopter, and
well, there was a helicopter that came in, and there was a patrol boat, and there was a time when the police they had some brand new uniforms, shining buttons, and so you would expect, and if the man who supplied these uniforms come in with an invoice and say, the payment has already been made, but I need to have it confirmed for my auditors, and that's it.
One last question from me has to do with the Ministry of State. Did letters from the Ministry of State, as far as the Ministry of Finance is concerned, substitute for flag receipts?
No, that's why they were sent to us, to authorize the issuing
of
the flag receipts, yes.
So as the Minister of State may write a letter, please, just to confirm that
I have received
$5 million.
$50,000, well, not that much,
okay,
but $5,000, please issue a receipt to the vendor. And this happened in the case of the rice money against customs duty on rice.
Yeah.
Okay, and I expect that if anything was done on the rice civilization piece, then that letter would go to the Ministry of Commerce. I don't know of the Ministry of Commerce issuing flag receipts. As far as I know, only the Ministry of Finance, Revenue Department, or the banks issued the flag receipts, because we were careful about handling those. As you have heard, there were often fixed flag receipts on the market all the time.
So beyond the letter from the Ministry of State, did the Ministry make any report to the Ministry of Finance, maybe at the end of a quarter, at the end of the year?
The Ministry of State?
The Ministry of State.
No. We made the reports, actually. It went the other way. And we would say how much money we had recorded as revenue, and we would say whether this money came in the form of cash received in the bank or cash that was just transferred directly. And we tried to keep the two separate.
Because of the nature of government operations at the time, how would you describe the whole process and procedure of issuing tax credit? Was it the order of the day, or it was an exception?
I think it was an exception. I think it was exceptional. It wasn't really the order of the day. And you will remember that during a lot of times during our tenure, it was conflict period. Things were not as normal as we would have liked. Okay, and even if we did collect all of this money and put it in the bank, it could still go the same way. The president could authorize, or authorizing signature could authorize money to pay directly out of the bank. And I don't know whether that happened or not, because I wasn't on the expenditure side, but it could very well be.
Thank you. Thank you.
I'm Commissioner Pearl Brownpool. Join the chairman to welcome you to come to explain citing facts that we had in our possession. And I think in keeping with procedure, we provided you here with the allegations that they had, to enable you to explain better. And I'm citing that, like you said, you have citing document that explains something. If you had known, you would have brought it. It's a positive, could you please let us have copy of that document?
Okay.
Yes. And the information issue to be discussed with you, very confidential. But at least we felt to refresh your memory, because someone as young as you are, we really figure that enable you to do a clearer picture. I even think that sheet of paper that we gave you should be returned. Because I was my copy. So, but just, you know, if you don't mind, after all the questioning, that you could leave it so in case anything get outside, we will say that you took it out. I want to say thank you because the question I had, like, you've already proven that within the period in question, there was civil conflict. So there were not, somehow there was some deviation from the proper financial transaction, the manner in which natural financial transaction with someone like you in your field would have done. The only thing I talk about this Stratefco Bank. You were there from 1979 97 to 2003. Are you aware of any occasion, prior, because you went there for whether there were records that would be able to verify that this is maritime money? Because you talk about the maritime money for giving, and they only told you how much they spent that went for government, you all were to get receipt. It gives me the impression and a belief, knowledge that I know, that the maritime money were used also for other purposes. For example, during the war, because you went 97 when they were legitimate government, but during the war, my information clear, I know that this maritime money at one period of time were almost our only source, big source of revenue. Is that am I correct?
Yeah.
Okay, yes. You know that the maritime money will come in, our really source of revenue. And that money, in fact, even during the interim government period, and Port time, God know Port you call it interim government period still, that money, they used to take that money, I know some, they used to take it to Stratefco Bank, and you will see the leaders of the different warring factions going there to pick up money from that maritime fund. Like, you know, the Francois Massacre and Subu who had their group, and Francois Massacre, and the other people, they used to go to Stratefco Bank to get some of that money. Are you aware of it?
Not during the period
Not your time.
that you're talking about, but the way the revenue situation works, okay? There's the Bureau of Maritime operating, let's say at the time in ITC.
Yeah.
ITC is responsible for it, and now LISCA. They receive proceeds from the ship registry, the corporate registry, and all of that on behalf of the government of Liberia. And the standing instructions is to transfer that money to the government of Liberia account at ITC.
Yeah.
Okay. Once ITC receives money from maritime sources, there is a bank advice that they would send to the Ministry of Finance for record purposes to say we have received $1 million. The best month when I was there, the best months were November, December, then July. Apparently that's the period when the ships will register and the corporate fees are paid. So they would just send a bank advice, and the bank advice would come to the expenditure department or directly to the minister's office to say maritime account at ITC now have $5 million in it. So it got to my office and we recorded the $5 million as receipts from maritime. And that's what we did. And then at the end of the month we would report, and at the end of the year we would report maritime proceeds. At the time it would average between $16 to $18 million a year, okay, when we were dealing with ITC. So once we record that revenue, our work is done. Now, who authorizes to go in there and take it out is another thing altogether. We didn't get involved in that. So it could be authorized by expenditure or some other authorizing authority.
Yes, you talk, but maybe not. You talk about ITC managed now by LISCA. Is this LISCA the same person who you talk about this Cohen? What do you call him, sir? Cohen?
Yeah.
Yes, okay. Thank you.
Okay.
you very much for your testimony. Now, you talk about Natura. Say Natura is a property of the University of Liberia. Is that correct?
It may or may not be the information I was giving at the time. And I know that because I've been in the forestry business before, I know that the university did have a forest. And they were attempting at various points in time to commercialize it. And this Natura now, I understand, was the forestry that the university had, that they had entered into a contractual agreement with the Goscovenhoven, with the Gos Group. Okay? And so they were making a payment. It could have been taxes, it could have been dividends, it could have been royalty. But I understood at the time that there was advance payment being made to the university. And somebody will have to verify that. But I couldn't accept that. It was just based on the information I was given.
And you say, who was it representing Natura again?
Mark, M-A-R-K, Kishen, K-E-S-T-H-E-N. Or Gus Cohenhoven himself.
Yeah, no, God's name is here, but
Yeah.
this Christian name was.
But he worked with him.
Is he still around?
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for coming. During the time of the stewardship as Deputy Minister for Revenue, was 1997 to 2003?
That's right. 1997 September to...
There were, during that period, Liberia had diplomatic relationships with Taiwan, and there were sums of money that was given to the government of Liberia by the Taiwanese government. I can't remember the figure offhand, but I do know that some money was given to the government of Liberia by Taiwan. Was such registered as revenue on the books?
Monies that we were aware of as being paid, and where the situation required a flag receipt, they came through us. Now, if any money came through the government of Taiwan and we were asked to give Taiwan a flag receipt for that, we would do that, but not necessarily so. There may be money received that we would not have been aware of. We have a portion in the budget under grants. All right, and if any money came, for example, from Taiwan as a grant, then we would record that revenue under grant. Okay, and if you pick up some of our revenue receipts, it's been 6 years. If you pick up some of our revenue receipts, you can see that those recordings were made. But if, for example, it came directly to the bank, and the bank received monies credited to government accounts, the bank would issue the flag receipts, and we had 4 copies of the flag receipt. One went to the person who gave the money, or the taxpayer, or the donor, or whatever. Another copy, 2 copies came to the Ministry of Finance, and 1 copy was retained by the bank.
Now I did hear you say that during the period, you were not involved with expenditure, so you will not be able to...
No.
I would like to ask, as a consequence of that response, I would like to ask whether national fiscal policy was compartmentalized in such a way that revenues coming in, you had no idea how revenue was dispensed, although you were responsible for receiving the revenue, but would it not have been something that would be the common knowledge of the ministers, deputy minister, to know revenue coming in and revenue being dispensed, for example?
At the end of the month, for example, we would all issue our reports, okay? And we would share reports. But while you are Deputy Minister for Revenue sitting in your office and you have just at the end of the day credited government account, maybe with $250,000 is in government accounts and is the work of the expenditure department based on the budget to allocate who gets that. I think they had, and they still do have, regular cash management meetings to manage the cash that was received. And we were not part of the cash management meeting. We were too busy chasing taxpayers.
Now, the National Port Authority is a major revenue generating arm of government. Can you say how much, for example, was generated, estimate, a rough figure, how much was generated during the period?
When we were there?
Yes.
Almost zero. Almost zero. We chased them for withholding taxes, which legitimately is the responsibility of every citizen who receives some kind of remuneration. We chased them for withholding taxes, but the argument at the time was always that government owed us so much money, and so when they withhold taxes from the individual employees, those taxes were simply not remitted, and it was a very difficult thing to collect any revenue from the port.
Now, does that include revenue generated by imports and exports?
Import and export, which basically comprise customs duties, was the responsibility of the customs people under the Ministry of Finance. That would have been my responsibility. If you brought in that microphone and we assessed a duty of $5 on it, you got the bill and you got the payment notice, and you went to the bank and paid it. So import and export wasn't under the Port Authority, but they did have their handling fees and port storage fees and those kind of fees, and they collected as part of port operations.
What would you know about the agreement between OTC and the government of Liberia?
It's a normal concession agreement which goes through the National Investment Commission process, which gives them certain investment incentives, and when all of that is done, the commissioners, which include the NIC chairman, commerce, agriculture, I think the minister, they would sign that concession agreement, and we would get a copy. Well, not always, sometimes we have to go after the copy just to see what investment incentives they were given.
So what was the role of the concession secretariat within the Ministry of Finance?
The concession secretariat attended those NIC meetings as a technician representing the Minister of Finance.
So it is our understanding that the OTC, the port of Buchanan, for example, was privatized to the OTC as there were some other ports. Now, in terms of what was brought in and exported, what would you say was the estimate figure of revenue that would have been generated where this concession agreement, within the framework of this concession agreement, considering that the concession secretary from the Ministry of Finance participated in these meetings and will have on record estimated revenue that was derived or to be derived from the port operations, say for Buchanan, for example.
Now you're confusing port operations and customs operations. Port operations would be under the port, the National Port Authority, and that would be the handling fees and that sort of thing. Now the customs duties would have been under the Ministry of Finance, under the Department of Revenue. Okay? So you want to know what would have been the estimate. Now the concession agreement would determine to a large extent what the income would be, because for example you get a concession agreement that says 90% exempt on all customs duties, 90% exempt, and that exemption would go for 5 years. If he's 90% exempt, then that means he's only paying 10% on what he's scheduled to pay.
So what did the agreement with OTC look like? What degree or what percentage exemption, for example, did OTC get?
I think it was one of those 90% exemptions. And you can get a copy of that agreement from the Secretariat.
At the Ministry of Finance?
At the Ministry of Finance, yes.
Now, it is also,
or the NIC.
It is also our understanding that OTC was making monthly shipments, and that the total, well, they made 3 shipments per month on an average of 31,000 thereabout cubic meters of logs, and 3 of such shipments amounts to something like 90,000 plus. So 90,000 plus cubic meters per month. So in terms of export revenue, how much was generated? What was the function of BVAC in this regard? What kind of reports they submitted to you as to assess duty? Because I assume at the time that BVAC was responsible for determining revenue applicable to the export of logs, for instance. So how much was that reflected in your records? How much revenue was generated for as export revenues on logging from the OTC?
Export revenue from OTC. BVAC, I don't remember BVAC being that involved in it, because BVAC was contracted for quality control, and they were collecting their own fees. All right, so whatever taxes you see were applied against OTC would have been what they would have generated. Now, we didn't have the time, and we never got around to assessing it, and that would, even if we did, the collector of customs in Buchanan would have had some kind of revenue figures down there. And since 6 years ago, I wouldn't keep those figures in my head. I'm sorry, Mr. Commissioner.
Did he have? And would those records be at the Ministry of Finance?
Yes, they should.
Now,
and the custom people would have it, and also the port people would have it.
You just said BVAC was involved in quality control, but prior to BVAC, there was the Société Générale de Surveillance, SGS, that conducted pre-shipment imports into Liberia. I'm not sure to what extent they were doing pre-shipment exports from Liberia. But when BVAC came in, according to what I learned, BVAC was also involved in pre-shipment export arrangements. And such was that they will assess and determine the value of duty that will be payable and applicable to government. So what I'm saying is...
BVAC did not get involved in duties so much as customs did. And BVAC did not have a presence in Buchanan at the time, as far as I know. BVAC went in to calculate what the BVAC inspection fee would be. And
for pre-shipment?
For pre-shipment export. Export. And there were a lot of the companies who had concession agreements, take Bison for example, who resisted any kind of inspection from BVAC. And the purpose of BVAC pre-shipment export, for example, was questionable, because in the case of logs, the buyer has already inspected his logs, and they question, why should you do my inspection when I already have a buyer if it's for quality control? Our customs officials down there calculated the duty. For, like you say, if 31,000 metric tons of shipment going out, that's a very large ship. I'm not sure about the figure, the size of the ships coming in, because the port will require a certain depth to get those large vessels, but they were large vessels. And the customs people will record, and there are their records now. If I record at BVAC that OTC is supposed to pay this amount, and OTC comes in and says, yes, I paid this amount, but I know I should pay this amount, but the amount has already been paid.
Didn't this present an anomalous situation to you as Deputy Minister for Revenue?
Didn't it present one? Anomalous?
An anomalous, yeah.
Well, those weren't normal times. Those were normal times, and a lot of times OTC was dealing directly. I think you heard of the word, the pepper bush. They dealt directly with the president. And so whenever we put the pressure on them, he would acknowledge that they had made this payment. Okay? So even if you estimated the amount of customs duty due, and the guy says he's already paid it, what can you do except acknowledge that, for example, $2 million has been credited to revenue because the money was paid to the government of Liberia?
But again, I will ask, was this not an anomaly that...
No, it wasn't an anomaly.
...will report revenues payable to government, and you as the repository of government revenues, or the collector of government revenues, would simply issue a receipt and says, well, this is what has been received, without authenticating whether this amount was actually received in the government coffers.
You weren't here earlier when we said that if I receive, and I mentioned that I have a list of payments that were made by OTC that were credited, tax credits, so OTC, up to $10 million were credited to them, or $8 million credited to them because they had already made it. And not necessarily just forestry revenue, the kind of thing that you're talking about, import-export revenue, which in the first place their concession agreement gave them a certain percentage waived, all right? Corporate tax waived. So whatever was due will have to be included in this $8 million that have been paid against certain instructions that came from the President of Liberia at the time. Okay.
Your office?
My office, through instructions from the President of Liberia, would issue the flag receipt, and we didn't just issue the flag receipt, we recorded the amount as revenue.
Can you give us an estimate figure on what was recorded during that period as revenue earned?
We recorded, well, to give you an estimate, there's an $8 million fee here. I have documents that say 12 million. All right, so you could take that 12 million as receipt for that period. And anything else that cash went into the bank, we will also have recorded them, but I cannot, I'm sorry, give you an exact figure of what was recorded in 2000 or 2003. No, I'm sorry.
Now, during the period also, there was a petroleum tax imposed for development purpose. How much was raised from that petroleum tax? Did you know?
That is also recorded in the revenue report. The petroleum tax at the time, I think, was 25 cents per gallon for the petroleum sales tax and 20 cents per gallon on petroleum import duty. Those taxes were paid through the banks, through the central bank, as part of government revenue and recorded. And so the records are also available on that. There were importing.
Were there any projections, for example, how much?
We projected from, at the time it was a company called West Oil. We projected about $300,000 a month, between $250,000 and $300,000 a month on sales tax and petroleum import duty.
That amounted to something like about 3.6 million a year.
Okay.
Say, so from 1997 to 2003, that figure would be something like almost 18 million plus. Was that reflected on the Ministry of Finance's books?
Sure. Whatever came in was reflected.
Now, the port of Greenville, what was the nature of the concession agreement with the Inland Logging Company?
Inland Logging Company had a special arrangement to operate the port of Greenville, and it came in, I think, around 2000, 2002, 2003, or maybe 2001, in the latter half of the administration. They had an agreement with the National Port Authority, and they ran it through there. So we were there to collect whatever customs duty was due.
So the concession secretariat again had no role in the formulation of that concession agreement with the Inland Logging Authority?
Maybe they did, and he can tell you directly. Maybe he did.
Is such an agreement available at the Ministry of Finance, for example?
It should be, sir. It should be.
It should be.
Yeah, but the agreement from port to port, the National Port Authority really should have that agreement, because it would not have been a concession agreement per se. It would have been, since NPA is responsible for operating all the ports, they had it within the purview to enter into contractual arrangements.
Yes, but what I know is that even though the NPA is management is responsible for imports, but revenues that derive from imports and exports are not under the...
They would be under the customs at the Ministry of Finance, the Revenue Department, and those would be recorded. No, we're not saying that they didn't collect anything. What I'm saying is whatever they collected is recorded and is there for the record.
Did your projections for revenue collection and subsequent to the takeover by Inland, was there any discrepancy, or was there any shortfall in revenue projections between the time prior to the takeover by Inland and subsequent to the takeover?
I don't think that port was functioning at the time. I don't think the port was functioning.
Like Greenville?
The port of Greenville, except maybe under MPA.
It was functioning.
We had a port collector down there, and whatever ships were coming in and revenue being recorded, he was collecting, making his deposits, and then reporting to the Ministry of Finance.
So the Ministry of Finance just had a perfunctory role? Or?
No, it did not. We had the authority to stop, and he did. We had a very good collector down there. He did. And he had the authority to stop any operations that were not up to date on the taxes. And generally, they would pay to the bank and show us evidence of payment by the flag receipt. It wasn't a perfunctory kind of arrangement at all.
What would you say about the case of Harper, the port of Harper, where
the ULC people?
Yes.
We had the same arrangement. We had our customs collector who collected revenue, deposited them, and made a report to central office. We had people assigned there.
Were there any discrepancies in the handling of those whatever revenue that came in? And were there any shortfalls in projections?
No, there were shortfall projections everywhere. Maritime, for example, we had shortfalls. Things didn't work out the way we had projected. Like I said, it was conflict time, and we started to experience revenue shortfall as the war became closer. There are always sometimes a revenue overrun.
Prior to 2001, for example, or prior to say between 1997 and 2000, were there any such shortfalls?
97 and 2000? When we got there in 97, there was almost little or no revenue being collected in the government. Like Commissioner Bull said, most of the revenue that was coming in to operate the country came through maritime funds. So a maritime fund made up a large portion of whatever came in as revenue. When we started working in September, we tried to ensure that the collection of revenue was less and less and less a percentage of government's overall collection mechanism. And so we started to send our collectors out in various ports to ensure, and then we did succeed in getting a higher portion of our total revenue from taxes, from domestic revenue, as opposed to maritime, even though maritime remained constant at between $16 to $18 million per annum.
What would you say was the relationship of the Ministry of Finance revenue arm to that of the central bank?
Say that again. The relationship between Ministry of Finance revenue.
Yeah, Ministry of Finance and the whole revenue, specifically to the central bank. When revenue is collected, did it go to the central bank? Did the central bank serve as a repository for all government revenues, even though accounts may have been placed in separate commercial banks?
Initially, because we wanted to capture all the taxpayers, and the Central Bank Act had not been passed. I think it was passed subsequent to that. Every commercial bank had an account of government for government. And so if your bank was LBDI, there was an account in LBDI where it was convenient for you to go and pay your taxes, your personal check to LBDI and get a flag receipt from there. Later on, when they passed the Central Bank Act, then of course Central Bank of Liberia became the single repository for all government revenue, except in case of special arrangements where we had an arrangement, I believe, with EcoBank, where we deposited the payments for driver's license plate and all of that. And the reason for that was because it was a dedicated account, and we had to pay for the printing of the plates, or like LBDI had for the passports. And these were dedicated accounts because the bank was responsible for collecting the money that was due to the vendor who printed the passport or printed the plate. And I think there were only in 1 or 2 cases like that the central bank did not receive the money, but the commercial bank did.
Now, recalling statements by the President upon her assumption of office that the Ministry of Finance was rotten with corruption, And at one point, had even stated that those who were in charge of departments and all of that needed to be replaced because the Ministry of Finance was rotten. Were there any validity to such? And what was the situation during your tenure when civil servants were known not to have taken pay for months? Was there any impact on overall revenue performance as a result of such a situation?
Well, when the 1997 group took over in September, civil servants had not been paid up to, I don't know, 13 months or something. And we regularized the payroll through the streamlining process. And in the last few months of 2003, when the war really hit, and revenue or the sort of thing, revenue diversion from maritime and other sources were going out for military purposes, you might say. So there was a shortfall in revenue available to pay civil servants. Now with the statement on the corruption, I think you will hear even now that there were people who were falsifying the flag receipts. We had cases where even at some of the banks where the teller and the taxpayer, there was collusion between them, where somebody come to pay their taxes and put the teller would put something under there and write the correct amount on the top and give the taxpayer, innocent taxpayer, a perfectly decent receipt, for example, $50,000. We found a case one time where the taxpayer came in with $50,000, and I'm going through the records, and there is a section in revenue called the revenue accounts. They send a monthly report to the deputy revenue at the end of every month to record those taxpayers that had made payments. And you see one taxpayer record $5, and then you ask, well, how can this taxpayer pay $5 when he's running this kind of business? So you call the taxpayer, and he comes in with a receipt for $50,000. So you ask for, like I said, finance got 2 copies, the bank retained 1, and the taxpayer got 1. All right, so that's 4 copies of the flag receipt. And we found out when the taxpayer came in with his $50,000 tax receipt, that what was actually recorded and came back to the Ministry of Finance was $5. So the corruption is there at all levels. Well, I wouldn't say all levels, but I always say that the sewage is on the ground floor. It's not necessarily upstairs on the first 3 floors, because you have to rely on because of the nature of tax administration at the time. Now they're paying everything, and we started the process of paying directly to the bank through the computer system, where the computer would generate what we call the BPS, the bank payment slip. Now if you rely on somebody down there to do it, there's a 50-50 chance of diversion of the revenue.
In your presentation, did I understand you to have said that you did not meet with the panel of experts?
No, I didn't meet with any panel of experts.
I mean the UN panel of experts.
No, I didn't meet with any panel. I met with one man at the Royal Hotel maybe 3 years ago, who asked me some questions about the same $8 million transfer, but I did not meet the panel of experts. And they went and wrote stories that were not true. Was he representing the panel, or which institution was he representing? I guess he was representing, he said that he was representing the UN, and he wanted to ask me some questions at Royal Hotel. I don't even remember his name. But I did not meet the panel. They didn't ask me any questions. And they went ahead and wrote stories. I had gone to Nigeria, and I had traveled this place, which was not true. Now, coming back to Natura, sometime during the tenure of the late President Doe, the university was granted a forest area. And I don't know who managed it at the time, but during your period, during your time, was there a concession agreement or any such agreement managing that particular forest by Natura? The first time I heard of Natura was when they came and said they needed tax credits because this was one of Mr. Covenhoven's company. And they had a concession agreement filed with the Secretariat I saw it at the time, basic concession agreement, 5-year tax investment incentives and that kind of thing. And they had paid a tax advance to the university of $2 million. Right. This was verified by the president that the tax advance had been made to the University of Liberia, and they requested a flag receipt to acknowledge receipt of this payment. Now, when the president of Liberia acknowledges that a payment had been made and authorizes the issuance of a flag receipt, we do that.
But it's difficult for me to comprehend how the president will issue a statement acknowledging that money has been paid into our tax revenues.
No, it was not paid into our tax revenue.
Or paid to where?
Said the money was being paid to the university.
And this was being reflected as income earned by the government of Liberia.
I acknowledge it as such, yes.
But how to confirm that such income was received?
Because the president of Liberia did confirm that the income was received, and I took his word for it. I did not go behind his back to check whether it was received or not. The representative of the company is in my office, and I get in writing that Natura has paid this money. It was okay to issue the flag receipt, and I did. And I think it was beyond my purview. Commissioner will go after him and verify that it has been paid.
But if we take it that public functionaries are supposed to safeguard the public trust, would it not be, did you not consider out of the way that the president would give a go-ahead that this money has been paid without your institution corroborating that this amount has been paid?
That's the way it was.
And you accepted it as it was?
Yes.
Now, how can you just briefly give us a picture of government's fiscal policy during the years?
In terms of revenue?
Yes. Revenue performance.
The revenue performance, the nice picture would be the procedure I outlined to you about the way the taxes should have been collected, and in most cases the way the taxes were collected. The exceptional cases was, and this is my assumption only, that perhaps due to the conflict situation that we were in, things didn't always go according to policy. But we made revenue projections for the year, for the period. We made revenue projections. And if there was some shortfall, we would like to know why there was some shortfall. And if money was paid that should have come into government revenue, we recorded that money as part of our projection. We didn't let it go. We recorded it as projection. For example, if we projected $25 million for a month, and most of the time I think we were averaging about $6 million a month. If we projected $6 million a month and found out that we only have $4 million, then we went after what happened to the rest. We would check maritime, we would check forestry, we would check the major taxpayers to find out what happened to the rest. And if we found out that they had already paid that money, then we said, well, this is money that had been projected by the revenue department, and we were not going to just have a shortfall because the money went, say, to somewhere else. So we took that money in and then made a notation that this money was not cash to the government, it was cash paid to such and such a destination.
Now, the money paid by, or the contribution by Mr. Pavarotti.
No, I know about that.
Was that recorded as part of government revenues?
We did not even hear about it.
But we in the public heard that there was a contribution for the construction of a children's village, the Pavarotti Fund. Did such, I'm asking, such,
no,
such channels?
Such revenue did not come through, such money did not come through the revenue department. Pavarotti from Italy, no, that money. No, it did not come through the revenue.
Okay, now, there was I guess, did you serve during the period when Mr. Barnes was Minister of Finance?
Yeah.
There was an agreement that was reached between the Ministry of Finance and the LPRC for concerning the National Housing and Savings Bank. And that agreement called for the Republic of Liberia to absorb the liabilities of the LPRC into the government accounts, absolve the LPRC of any amount owed, and in return, the government of Liberia, through the Ministry of Finance, was to receive $400,000 a year for a 10-year period in petroleum products. Were you aware of such an agreement? We're not aware. This agreement was signed by Mr. Snow, by Mr. Barnes, by Mr. Finlay.
Well, unless it affected revenue where money actually came in, then I would know about it, and whichever bank that money was paid into would have issued a fact receipt to LPRC.
There was an agreement calling for $400,000 worth of petroleum products. To be paid, well, $400,000 to be paid on an annual basis for a 10-year period to the government of Liberia through the Ministry of Finance, but that will be in the form of petroleum products supplied to the ministry. At the time, the ministry was on record of purchasing fuel. Were you aware of this? Or was the Concession Secretariat in the Ministry of Finance aware of that?
If it was a purchasing contract, sir, it would have come through expenditure, not revenue.
Not purchasing contract.
Revenue contract.
Did it generate?
Did it generate revenue? Not from my office, no.
400,000, and your office was not aware of that?
No. If it came to the bank, if they paid it automatically to the bank, okay, the bank would issue a revenue. If somebody sent me a note and say LPRC has given 400,000, please take it in as revenue, or please issue a flag receipt, I would know about it and I would record it. But that did not come to my attention.
No.
Maybe Mr. Barnes may have handled it another way.
Yes, but I put it within the context of revenue that due to come into the government, government's coffers, and you as chief magistrate of government generating arm would have an idea. Anyway, during that period, or during the years, the Ministry of Finance was the statutory chairman of Liminco. The Ministry of there was an agreement that was reached to sell ore from Liminco, owned by Liminco, again talk about revenue, to interested buyers. How much was projected to be received by government as a result of that agreement? And was that agreement in any way channeled through or handled by the Concession Secretariat?
All of those agreements should have been handled by the Concession Secretariat. To the best of my knowledge, the Concession Secretariat is party to all of those agreements. They should be, because they represent the technical arm of the ministry.
But as it turned out, the Minister of Finance at the time was chairman of the board of directors of this company to whom the ore had been sold. I can't recall the name of the company now, but I
thought you said he was chairman of the board of Liminco. I thought
yes,
he was chairman of Liminco.
He was chairman of the board of Liminco. But at the same time, there was a private company that was formed in which he was chairman or shareholder, and this ore was sold to this company. I can't remember the company offhand, but I have the...
If I'm not aware that cash came from that company, maybe they just... Now you see, cash may come into the bank with hundreds of taxpayers and hundreds of people paying, and all the revenue accounts office will do is record it. Okay? It may not necessarily come across my desk, and I would not necessarily have been party to the agreement. All right?
From the position of that, It is revenue projected to be received by government.
No, we didn't
The sale of the
necessarily.
ore?
If, for example, we do our revenue projections for this year in January, and this deal goes down in October, there's no way we would have known in January, a year prior to that, that this deal is going to go down. Therefore, we'll take it in as revenue
Not
projections.
necessarily a deal, but the projections will come
That
from the
this-
fact that the ore is on the ground, and when this ore is sold, X
You
number of
cannot
dollars.
estimate a projection based on the potential that when this ore is sold. We're doing our revenue
But
projection.
you have a knowledge of the tonnage of ore, and you have a knowledge of world market prices. So you would know without even the ore being sold,
No way.
that this represents a potential
It's
revenue.
a potential
of-
revenue, but not a revenue that we can budget on. We work with the budget.
Granted,
Uh-huh.
granted. The point is, it will be revenue that may flow into the government.
May is the operative word here.
That should.
It may,
That
or
should.
it should, but if it does not,
Or that
I
must.
cannot take it, I cannot project something that I'm not sure I can perform on. All right?
Were you aware of this
I can
agreement?
perform, if each of you here is due to pay $10, I can put in my revenue projection 10 times 7, project $70. But if you tell me that these people here may or may not be in this office, I can project definitely on them.
That's a different cup of tea.
It's the same thing.
No? Here you have assets that can be sold from which revenue can be derived.
Okay, stop right there.
Let's make a progress.
Assets that can be sold is not something that you can make a budget to pay civil service salary on. It may or may not be sold. If it comes in, it's a windfall.
Advance another question. Let's move forward.
Thank you.
Very much.
Thank you.
Testing. Okay, so very happy again that you could join us to shed light on these points. Hope that you have some refreshment there.
No, it's okay.
Okay. All right. I'm just trying to understand generic issues that are very important. For example, the normal process for payments to be made to the Bank of Liberia was for a company or individual to pay into your bank account, right? You had several bank accounts at Central Bank and various other private banks.
Initially, we
People
used
pay
the commercial bank, but once the Central Bank Act was passed, then 2000.
So during the period from 1997 to 2003, there was a Central Bank Act passed in around 2000.
Around 2000, I think.
Okay, and what did that do?
The Central Bank Act authorized the Central Bank of Liberia to receive all government revenue. All the collection of government revenue was centralized in the Central Bank of Liberia.
That became a legal
That was
process.
a legal document, yes.
Everything, even if I owed the government $10,
You
it
pay
had
to
to
the
go
Central
through the
Bank of
Central Bank.
Liberia, yes.
Okay.
And the Central Bank of Liberia, like the commercial banks before then, was given a stack of pre-numbered government official receipts, and that for every payment made, they recorded it, and it was done manually at the time by the teller to receive the payment.
But yet you just told us also that there are cases where people would receive money in the government, particularly the president's situation, as a verifier, and then people will come to you later to get receipts that this money was
And then he would
received.
verify that he did, or the Minister of State for Presidential Affairs would verify that this money was indeed paid. And then there was a situation that led to that. If the mansion requested money, which is the correct procedure, from the Ministry of Finance Expenditure Department, and it was an emergency and there was a delay at the Ministry of Finance, and sometimes the word delay for small amounts, 10,000 or something. The president took it upon himself to call a vendor and say, look, I need this $10,000, and they give it to him.
They would give him cash.
They would give him the cash or whatever form it took. And then he would acknowledge it to my office, because I'd go after the vendor for tax payments, and he would say on such and such a date, we paid this money to the mansion. And most often than not, the Minister of State would verify that the payment was indeed made in the form of a letter.
And you have those letters on file? I mean,
I haven't been there since
Ministry of
2003, but they should be there. Yeah.
Those letters should be on file.
And Minister Taylor, who was Minister of State at the time, would also verify that.
Jonathan Taylor?
Jonathan Taylor.
Is he with the government now?
No, he's not.
Or is he in the country now?
Yes, he is.
So you say this was done a lot, in a sense, in many cases like this? Where
Well, I wouldn't say a lot, but in instances where it was done, we acknowledge receipt of the payment.
Okay. So, for example, this issue with this Natura company, where this was almost $2 million, which is not a small amount, and there was a letter sent to you by the president that the government of Liberia had received this money.
The money had been paid, yes.
You have you said
We
you
have
some
something
letters
with
at
the-
home. Was that one of those letters you kept?
Yeah, I have. That was about the only thing I kept.
Is it possible we would have a copy of that just for our file?
I already told Commissioner Bull that I would give her a copy.
So in this case, according to your knowledge, this $2 million or so was paid to the University of Liberia.
That was the indication given to me at the
In
time.
the letter, it specified that the University of Liberia has received this $2 million. Therefore, as president, I'm verifying that it's okay.
Well, not in so many words, but there was a list of payments that he had okayed.
Right.
And that okayed to me because I wouldn't give a receipt unless I had something in hand. You know, right now my neck is on the line, but I have that too.
So if there's any evidence then that this money was put into a private account, for example, of the president, what would you have to say about something like that? Minister or deputy minister of our government at that time?
I would say
Would it be a surprise thing, or has it happened before?
I would say that it's unfortunate because this is the statement that I was giving as to where this money was going. Okay, there were some instances where the money actually went into LBDI and it said Government of Liberia account, all right, at LBDI. And the money had already been put there or paid there, and and the person who paid, if you're a taxpayer and you paid somebody a good chunk of money and they tell you, okay, go to the Ministry of Finance and they will issue you a receipt for this. Okay, and if you came to the Ministry of Finance and say, I paid this money, it's money out of your coffers, and you want somebody to acknowledge that it's been received. All right, and if that somebody is me who has been instructed to give Mr. Coleman a receipt for this amount because it has been paid to the government of Liberia, then you put the pressure on me to give you the receipt, which you need for your shareholders and for your auditors.
I mean, I understand the logistical process that you went through. I'm just trying to understand whether in the ministry at the time did you all consider this kind of thing strange, or was it just the normal practice, or what, you know? Those
were not normal times, as I told you. There was conflict. I mean, we could hear guns going from all directions, and they really were not normal times. Okay. Now, the first 2 years, for example, we didn't have too many of those until the conflict started in Lofa.
What time?
Until it started in Lofa.
Oh, so around
then there was a period there when these things started to happen.
So the beginning part, 97, 98, things were relatively normal.
They were relatively normal. We had procedures and
procedures were followed. But and there was no particular act or anything passed to give the president this type of abnormal power. It was just something he took upon himself, and everybody just sort of followed it. Did anybody make a request for Mr. President? This is illegal.
Commissioner, I think you're asking me to make a moral judgment on that, and I can't do that. I can't tell you whether what it was done. I mean, you're working with your boss, who is the ultimate authority in the country, and then you're asking me to pass a moral judgment on that. And as Commissioner, sure, whatever you do, I can't do that.
I was concerned about, like you said, things were normal. There's a procedure.
There is a normal procedure for that. Yeah.
So now, when somebody moves away from that act, is it normal in a government amongst ministers, etc., to just accept a president's decision, or did you all feel that, well, because of this wartime, these are special rights that he should have?
It could be. I can't interject my feelings into that.
That was the mind in which you went through it, right? Okay, that's good. Okay. Anybody else have this kind of authority where you could get a letter from a deputy, a minister of commerce or a minister of state that you could
Not to
accept
give,
this kind of thing
not
to
to
them?
give.
Only the president?
Yeah.
It was only the president you accept this kind of thing from?
There were, for example, some of the logging companies, they would go and build a road. They would be requested or work with the Ministry of Public Works to build a road. And they would build this road, and the Ministry of Public Works would acknowledge to me that there were 25 miles of road built. And based on the quality of this road, we are assessing it at $25 a mile, okay? And he would write a letter and request. In that case, there was a letter because I insisted on it. He would write a letter and request that this particular logging company be given credit for building 100 miles of road at $200 per mile, sort of thing. And that we did, but we always had the corresponding letter.
So who was the Minister of Finance during that period, 97 to 2003, with you? As deputy?
97, it started off with Eli Silibi. He was minister. After Eli Silibi, there was John Bestman, I think. And then Nat Barnes. And then Charles Bright.
During that period with 4 ministers. Who was the deputy minister, the one that handled the expenses that you mentioned was just now?
The first deputy minister for expenditure was Morris Satuma, Honorable Morris Satuma. And after him, it was Mr. Charles Allen.
So that means when in 97 to 2003, these two gentlemen were the ones who handled all the release of money from the government?
Yeah, along with the comptroller. The controller was Rosamond Perkins, and later on it was Fulton Reeves. They were crucial in the expenditure process. And then of course there were the assistant ministers. One of them is dead now.
The larger picture.
The larger picture.
The people who have the higher authority in the organization.
Yeah.
In your records, did the GOL of like this government ever purchase arms officially?
No, not in my records, no.
So from 1997 to 2003, the government of Liberia never purchased one arm.
No. And even if they did, it wouldn't come through my office. And the records that I have for allocating these tax credits did not include any payment for arms.
To replenish the arms at our stockade place. So we never had to do any of this stuff officially. Everything that was done must have been done under the table somehow. Because
I don't know what was done, sir.
No, well,
not through my office, I don't know.
The UN put sanction on us. We saw arms coming in and out of the country.
We did.
And there was fighting going on.
I saw it the same way like you saw it, but not through my office.
Yeah,
no.
the key point was nothing was done officially.
Yeah,
Okay.
the list that I would provide the commission with has in no place anything to do with arms. Okay, like I said, there was uniforms, there were patrol boats, there was a helicopter, and in some cases it said direct payment to government of Liberia account at LBDI or someplace else. Okay, but no arms.
Okay. Files or a computer was dismantled at the ministry? I mean, was this an accidental thing or what happened?
I don't know, but when I left the Ministry of Finance in 2003, my office was, the office of the Deputy Minister of Revenue was taken over by Minister Crawford. What's his first name? Crawford. Okay. Not Nathan, his brother, Emmanuel, I think? Emmanuel, yeah. Okay. it was taken over, and I left all the records intact. There was an announcement on the radio that everybody who had been appointed by the previous administration had to vacate the office by so-and-so date, and we did that. We didn't, I didn't bother with packing too much stuff. The letter that I referred to just happened to be in my bag, and we left. So the records were all intact, but then I was told later on that in trying to access some documents out of the computer, the hard drive was damaged. But still, we kept pretty good files, and they should be there.
Does the government have like an asset listing registry of some sort that can be made available to review?
Asset listing?
Yeah, what we own as a country. You bought, for example, you bought the boat, you bought the helicopter. Is there a listing there showing like real government owns one helicopter, when it was retired from service, what the money was put into the
not that I know of.
You don't keep this kind of record?
Not, you don't keep this
But I
kind
mean,
of
the
record.
ministry doesn't keep this type of record of its own assets?
It's probably somewhere,
Like the
but I
bulletproof
would have it
car
like,
that was
but
given
something,
to the president?
the best place to have that kind of thing would be GSA.
Or GSA probably is
That would be
responsible for
that would be the most appropriate place
Okay,
to have
I'll
something
check
like
into
that.
So once you purchase something, then, I mean, is GSA responsible to keep track of the asset listing, the retirement planning?
And then again,
the
it depends on how
depreciation,
much
all that?
information was disclosed to civil servants. You don't always receive the information that you should, and you work with what you got. And you can't go behind the president and say, I want to see this and I want to see that. Who set you up as auditor of the president?
So then that's my next question. Was there a system where once a year or a period has finished in government with activity based on budget expenditure, that an audit is done to see whether things were done right during that period? Is this General Auditing Service the only facility that does this?
There was an auditor that came from the General Auditing Service and went through the ministry a couple of times. We had the auditors come from Ghana 1 or 2 times and go through a forensic audit of the revenue and the expenditure department. That definitely was done. The question of the asset list, I really didn't know, because we had so much work just trying to chase taxpayers that that wasn't on our purview.
Do you know about cases where government ministries were directly collecting public money and not passing through the system?
That was an
We
issue.
understand the
That
government
was
presence
a major issue. So much so that an act was passed. The act to centralize the collection of government revenue in the Ministry of Finance. That was an issue, and that act was passed.
That's the 2000 Act with the Central
No,
Bank,
the
was it?
2000 Act of Central Bank is a separate thing, but we tried to get the revenue centralized because it got to the point where every ministry had its own set of little payments and fees and form charges and all that kind of thing, and it was very difficult to get a handle on what was actually being collected, and so that act was passed.
When was that act passed,
Centralized
please?
it.
Approximately. Before 2000,
we
before
did
the
it.
Central Bank Act, or after that Central
I think it
Bank?
was after. I think it was after. But there is such an act. There is such an act.
Can you help me? There's some position I just want to get a feeling. If you don't know, you can just tell me, but I'm just wondering. You helped me already with the Ministry of Finance at the time. Minister of Commerce, who was the Minister of Commerce during that period, 97 to 2003? And worked with
There was a minister who died. I don't remember his name. Yes, he was the first one in 1997. And then after that, there was Kaba, Dr. Kaba. And I think after Kaba there was Mrs. Peabody, Cora Peabody. I don't know if there's anything in between.
So, in summary, I can see from what you're telling me that there was a lot of space during the time of 1997 to 2003 for money to be collected directly from large business corporations, timber companies, mining companies, etc., and used by key confidants of the president without necessary records having to be put on file. The general statement seems that happened during that time, right?
It depends on the circumstances, and I wouldn't be that. I mean, I can be very, very. You might say naive and say I was the sole responsible collector of government revenue, but that wasn't true. We weren't obviously collecting everything that was due. Even the administrative tax administration process was very, it was limited. You're working with civil servants who've been doing things a certain way all along, and you come and try to change it. Even some of the people who we fired for doing some irregular stuff, they come back during the next administration and say they fired me because I didn't like Charles Taylor, and then they write back again, and then you hear their name in the papers for doing the same thing that we fired them for. Because I don't know if people don't like to read or what, but nobody goes through the record to see what is there. And so maybe what you're saying is true, but I think that they acted with some kind of authority. Okay, with some kind of authority, knowing that they would be covered if they took certain actions. If, for example, we anticipating $18 million collection in revenue, and we got 16 million, and then we reported that we got 16 million, and the Bureau of Maritime says no, it wasn't 16 million. I can't report what he got. I could only report what I received from the bank.
So the reason I asked you, because yesterday we had a hearing of a small industry, let's say the timber, where we see that the reports you all had on record, the finance, the central bank, and the FDA, were all different. You know, the differences in these reports. And then on top of that, actual statistical analysis was done on what actually left the port. And there was reports that over $100-something million worth of loans left the country during the period without anybody knowing anything about it. And then of course
somebody had to know. Somebody had to know. The ships had to leave the port, and the port needed to have records. Okay. The customs people were there to record it, even if they didn't necessarily get the money, or the money wasn't necessarily paid. They have the record, and this is how we managed to get bills and back bills. And whenever anything like this happened, I mean, I made sure that the FDA was party to the signature on the tax credits that we gave, because they're the ones, the FDA officers down there, the customs officers, and then there's the port people. So somebody had some record of what was going out.
But the thing is, we had records also that ports were managed by private individuals who had vested interest directly with the president, so therefore it wouldn't be in their interest to review records. So a ship could go out at night and nobody would just know. Or even the situation of people who were hired, civil servants, to keep tallies. If something should have been 20, they will put 10. And then nobody's going to stand on the ship and see that 20 is going when it's really 10. So I'm just saying that there was a lot of space for this kind of thing to happen. And I wonder in the new...
And maybe, I think maybe it was the tax administration. You know, everybody had an authority at the time. If you, for example, go to a commercial merchant ABC, and you want to make sure he has 5 or 10 aliens working there, and these aliens are supposed to be paying. That's one of the situations with the centralization of government revenue, and these aliens are supposed to be paying work permits. And you go there and you see the signature of a minister saying that this company has paid for his work permit to the Ministry of Labor. It's a frustrating thing for the revenue collector, because that is not supposed to be. Okay. All right, but things like that do happen.
Okay. I was wondering, during your administration, between the year 2000 and 2006, did a company like Lone Star, did they pay income tax to the government? Because we have
they paid. There was
they made huge amounts.
There was. We have records of their paying. For example, the employees withholding taxes they pay.
No,
but there was also
what they make.
There was also the 2% and the 4% payment that they did, and they did make in the payment. Our system of revenue is collection, is self-declaration. So they declared that they made so much money, and 2% of the top was the presumptive tax that was paid, the quarterly presumptive tax. And we do have records of payment, and you can't do too much about that except to send the auditors in and have them verify that what payment was made was what payment that should have been made.
And you never did that?
We did that. We did that.
And did your auditors show any difference?
Yes, they did, and lots of times they showed the difference and some money was paid. Now, whether that difference was the correct difference is
so you're saying that the only payment you expected from them was this 2% and 4%?
the corporate taxes they paid. Now, in their case, they fell in the 2% category because of the level of their income. They fell in that category. And we had records at the Ministry of Finance of payment of those taxes, of those amounts, so as well as the employee withholding taxes.
Yeah, I'm just trying to say, so in those days then, it was big corporations like that, all they had to pay was just 2% of the totals. If they made $10 million, they just had to pay a couple $100,000
to you. Quarterly presumptive tax, 2% per quarter. Okay. And then they were required to file their tax returns, okay, during the tax period. They had to file. And then we would see the filing against what was paid, and if there was a shortfall, then they paid that amount also. That's the way it works.
So what were they expected to pay? Put it that way. That 2% was like an advance payment, with the understanding that at the end of the year, when you verified everything, what was the total amount they were expected to pay on their net income? Put it that way.
Well, then you would have to know what the net income is, sir. Otherwise,
so
you're making a presumption.
Scale, right?
Yes, and
like
they had,
now,
when it started initially, there's no way with about 5,000 subscribers that you can compare with what they're doing now, where I understand they have over 20,000 subscribers, so that would be a big jump. It would be a gradual increase.
So I'm just trying to understand whether, anyway, I guess I can ask the finance ministry for the tax rate at that time. Was it, what, 25% of their total income was supposed to have been paid as income tax?
The corporate income tax.
Yeah, corporate income tax? 25-30%, right?
Yeah.
Okay, and that 2% was just an advance?
That 2% is an advance presumptive income tax that we collected.
At the end of the period now,
then
the difference, a total of the 25, meaning 23 more percent or whatever,
the corporate taxes
would have to be paid.
Would have to be paid.
And you're saying that Lone Star paid up everything well?
No, I'm not saying that at all.
Oh, that's not.
No, I'm not saying that at all. I'm telling you the process by which it should have been done. And they did make some payments. But only the auditors can go in there and find out by some kind of a audit review whether what was paid was correct or not, and whether we have a shortfall. I can't tell you that.
So from 2002 or 3, from when you were there, your feeling was there a need to further investigate Lone Star, or were you satisfied with the payments they had made to you, to the government?
We're never satisfied with any payment anybody makes.
Okay,
we
so
send the auditors in.
There was be a need to go further.
Yes.
Okay, that's what I want to understand. And why was it that Shaw and Urey were put up for this? Is it that they were administrators of that organization?
I don't know why they single out Shaw and Urey. Number one, I'm saying I didn't meet no panel of experts.
No, I'm not talking about panel expert issue. I'm talking about the Lone Star.
The Lone Star, why Shaw and Urey, as far as I know, were employees of the company. I was not aware that they were also shareholders or anybody was shareholders.
Their positions, please? As employed, what were their positions?
I don't know.
Janitor, or I assume somebody like Shaw and Urey.
Maybe they were in top executive position, I really don't know. But if they were employees, then they were paying employees withholding taxes. If they were paid dividend, that's what the auditors will find out.
Okay. And then with the maritime issue, you did mention that there's time where they were paying money to the government, but you'll notice that there was a difference factor. Now, this difference factor, is there any clarification of what it could have meant? I mean, is it that this maritime company was paying money to somebody else that didn't go through your records, or just that it was stealing money from the government and weren't paying, but they should have been paying to us, or what? How did you see that difference?
I don't know what could account for the difference, but there were times when our records, which were based on bank advice, issued by the bank saying we received this amount of money from Maritime, all right? Maritime Commission in turn made a report of what they were collecting or they were supposed to collect. And I'm saying that our records did not always jive.
Was it big or small? $50, $100, or $1 million?
No, it wasn't $100. No, that wouldn't be. There were just maybe $1,500,000. something
Okay,
like
so
that.
it's a big amount.
So yeah, it's a big amount that I'm sure could be explained.
So it was never really verified during your administration or your period?
No,
just one
wasn't
of those
verified, or if there was an explanation, the explanation was there, but I wasn't. Everybody was happy to it, but I didn't go after it.
Okay, thank you very much.
With your permission, Mr. Chairman, Madam Witness, did you ever serve FDA? Did you ever work for FDA?
No, no,
You worked for LPMC, right?
no, no. LTP, which was Vamply at the time, the Liberia Timber and Plywood Corporation in China. Yeah.
Well, you gave us, you spoke on here, and from the way you spoke when it came to ask those questions, you must have some professional background in something, because, you know, so could you please, before you leave, give us a little more your professional background, tell us a little more about yourself, like, because you were in history, where you from, not so much of in school, your professional background, enough for us to know when witness Juanita Mason these who is Juanita Mason.
Well, I grew up in Robertsport. I'm the daughter of a General Mason, Jonathan Mason, who was from Robertsport, and my mother was commonly called Lady Johnson. I went to high school at CWA, and later on to Mahoyo College in South Hadley, Massachusetts. I majored in chemistry. And then I went to Harvard University intending to work on a master's program, but I did enough work there and got married and came home. I completed my master's later on at college in Massachusetts. My first job when I came from school in 1970 was with the Liberian Mining Company as salary accountant. And because I came home with a degree in chemistry, they put me in the industrial chemistry lab to just test the iron ore. And after a while, if you remember Jerusha Holder, she was in the cashier's office. And when she left, got married to Bill and left, they called me in to do the salary accounting. So I was handling salaries for the expatriates and other high officials. Later on, I transferred as resident manager for LNC to Monrovia. And when LNC closed down, I was given the task of finding jobs for the over 3,000 employees who had lost their jobs as a result of that closure. So in the process of trying to place our mechanics, heavy-duty drivers, and all of these professional people in the various areas, I ran into the Bong Mining Company, who took several of our engineers. I worked with Bong Mines for 5 months as an insurance adjuster, and I wasn't very happy with the Liberianization policy they had there. So when Vamply asked me to come and work for them as resident manager in 1988, I accepted the job where they asked me to name my own salary, which was nice. And when the company closed down in 1980 because of the war, you know, the Americans, Vamply was an American company that started with Vancouver plywood from Canada and J. Paul Getty from the States. It was a $17 million investment. But when the Paul Getty group, the Vamply group, decided that they had enough of whatever they were doing in Liberia, they turned the company over to a small group of American executives. They went to President Talbot at the time and said they had this company, and they were preparing to offer him shares in the company. And he said no, he wouldn't take any personal shares, but he would turn the shares over to the Truick Party. So the Truick Party had 51% of the Vamply shares, and the American executive headed by a guy named Bob Huff, he had 49% of the shares. And so I was working with them until 1980 when the coup occurred, And what they did, they had a little helicopter that went into the bush, picked them up, took all the American executives. There weren't that many, there were about 3 or 4 of them, because of the activities in the country at the time, they had shipped all of their families out. So there was just, I think, the general manager and 2 other Americans. So they left from a place called Mile 20 in the bush. They took off, and of course everything started to happen down there. There was West End who had gone down there, was shooting up the place, and I had to run to the mansion and tell them to give me some people to come down to Vampire. And I tried to quiet the situation, so he gave me, I went down to Vampire with Bai Bala, Johnny Boy, and Isaac Musa, who just died the other day. And we went down there, and I had to stand between Johnny Boy, Herring, and Kuwampa. So I went down there, and there was Kuwampa that way, and West End that way, and they took out their guns, and they started to. So I thought I was dead, standing in the middle, and then they wanted to know who reported us to that board down there named Doe. So I kind of came in there. At the time, I must have weighed about 100 pounds, and I came in there, and you small girl, you reported us. And anyway, the bottom line is they took out their guns to shoot each other. And from the back of my head, I saw the nurse. I had my eyes closed tight. I saw the nurse coming from the clinic. And when I saw her, I thought I had died and gone to heaven. Somebody with a... Anyway, somebody came up, Kuwampa came up, and there was somebody else. He came up and said, he stopped it. He put his gun back. He stopped it, and he said, okay, when we go to Monrovia, we will solve this thing. So meantime, I had to travel with Mr. Bagbala to go, because what happened as soon as the executives left, they closed all of the accounts. They went to the accounts and started to withdraw money. Laws had been shipped to buyers who were sending money to the company account. So what I did, I went to Citibank. They were still here, and I asked them to freeze the account. I called the other people and asked everybody to just freeze the account, because we didn't know what was going on and what these people. We didn't want any more money withdrawn until we knew what was going on. And so I'm sitting in my office one day. I get this telephone call from the States, and this American voice says, "Who the hell authorized you to freeze the account?" And I didn't know what else to say, so I said, "The government of Liberia." And the government of Liberia hadn't really authorized me, so I had to run across the street. Chechipo was the Minister of Justice, and asked him to give me authorization to freeze the account. And once the accounts were frozen, Bala, myself, and there was a lawyer from the Ministry of Justice, we had to go to Paris, to Geneva, and to New York to find out what was in those accounts and have the money transferred back here. And Mr. Huff at the time was very recalcitrant. He wasn't about to send the money, so we finally came up with something to scare him, and we said we were going to report his income that he has withdrawn to the IRS. Then he agreed to give us $1 million to the account. So I'm traveling all over Europe with this $1 million manager's check made out to the government of Liberia in my briefcase. But anyway, we got the account transferred to Citibank, and the shares were also at the time made out to 100% government of Liberia. But he transferred his 49%. Government has seized the TWP 50%, so it was 100% shares now, and that's the way I know it is. Later on, people went into the Vampire Forest. They had 1 million acres of forest land that they were operating in. And so after Vanfly, we had to look for investors to take over the concession, because it was more than 10 years old now. The equipment was dead, and that's when we got the Israelis to come in. And the President Doe at the time was very open to the Israelis. That's a company called Yona International. Yeah, they took it over, and I didn't feel that I wanted to work with them, so I left and kind of started my own timber business. I used to go in the bush, buy timber, and sell it. I was like a timber buyer, and then put a profit on it and ship it. So I've always worked in the private sector for myself until 1988, when President Doe asked me to serve as the Commissioner of Income Tax. So I was with the Commissioner, I was the Ministry of Finance Commissioner of Income Tax for 88, 89, And then 90, he asked me if I could go up to expenditure, but I didn't stay as Deputy Minister for Expenditure very long, because then, of course, 1990, all kinds of things happened, and then I had to leave, and that's from 1990 to 1994. I stayed in the States, so my grandmother was already almost 90 years old, and I didn't want to stay there, so I came back the beginning of 1996, and then April 6th, we had to go again, so I went to Abidjan. Stayed in Abidjan for 18 months and worked with the African Development Bank there. Until the election 1997, I worked very actively with the Johnson Sirleaf campaign. And so I was surprised when I got a call saying that I was being asked to work in the Taylor government as Deputy Minister for Revenue. Sirleaf called me actually, because he and I had worked together on it, and that's how I got into revenue. But I didn't think I was going to get it because I had no prior connections with Taylor. He didn't really know me, but it was on Minister Sirleaf's word that he chose to accept me. And I must say we worked in a professional capacity. We didn't have any real personal relationship, but I think he appreciated my professionalism, and he dealt with me on that basis. And after that, when they said get out of Ministry of Finance in 2003, I got out and formed a private investment company with 2 other partners, and that's where I am right now.
Thank you very much. I realize you spent more than we anticipated, but I just want to bring 1 or 2 things to your notice, and maybe you could say a little bit more. We have a form letter here of GOL tax payment transfer. We spoke about that, and you said you were authorized to make these transfers. And you will be giving us some documentation on some of the presidential authorizations. But basically they are signed by you, and specific accounts are identified. Some of them I can recognize, and I was wondering whether you have an idea as to who these account holders were. For example, Nations Bank, Florida, the amount of 91,000 was directed for transfer in July.
I have that. That, you know, hindsight is something. Now that I look hindsight on those letters, I should have preceded those letters with by authority of the president. I did not do that because at the time these letters were done under really high pressure situation. But I had the listing in front of me with his initials and his okay and all of that, and all of those were listed.
You still have that listing?
I still got it. That's the same one. So each one, and then the nature of the transfer, the reason for the transfer is also listed.
It's
so
possible.
If I had thought about it, I would have.
That these were just means of, what's the word you use? Of cleaning up money for illegal purposes.
Is it possible it was what?
This money were being laundered?
Launder money? How would you know if you see a payment to Nations Bank for uniforms for the police? How would you know?
Because one of these, Hong Kong and Shanghai.
Shanghai, those, I think that's the one for the boat, the patrol boat.
Yeah.
Everything there, every one of those letters has an explanation in the listing that he initialed. Right.
Hong Kong and Shanghai are arms dealers.
I have no idea. I'm sorry, I don't know.
Bank of New York is an account established by Myron Shaw when he was Minister of Finance, and all subsequent ministers of China of Finance have been signatory to this account. Bank Diamantaire and Versul of Mr. Sanjivan Rupa. He's a renowned,
yes, I saw his name on the list.
He's a renowned arms dealer.
I saw his name.
And that's 500,000.
Yeah.
So please, we will.
I will give you a photocopy of that.
Yeah.
It's in my office right now, and I don't think my people are closed yet. If somebody wanted to go with me, I'll just hand it out to them.
Tomorrow is okay. You mean
Tomorrow? Okay.
If you do it. Then lastly, I will now go through the other ones. We recognize that these were abnormal times.
I mean, I have
War was
no
coming.
idea that those accounts were being made, specifically since there wasn't any armed mention.
Yeah.
Maybe it was done deliberately so that I would know what was going on, because like I said, we did strictly professional. If he wanted to do something straight and above board, he would write to me and I would do it. And like I said, in hindsight, maybe I should have said by authorization of, and then it wouldn't look as if I did it on my own. But I do have that letter, and I mean, there were about 3 or 4 people waiting to have that thing. It was rush. I remember the situation very well, and so I was just doing these letters quickly. They were all in the computer, and I guess there's some of the stuff that were taken out. And the reason given to me was that the auditors were coming and they wanted to show that this money was paid in good faith to the government. All right? And that's about, and if you look through my work at the Ministry of Finance, that is about the only unusual transaction that came out of my office under my signature. And all of that payment, I understand, have been done like 1999, 2000, and those letters were actually done in 2003. And the computer would show that.
Were there any personal gains out of all of these transactions?
No, I'm sorry. There wasn't any personal gain. I just thought that I was doing something in the line of duty. There wasn't any personal gain whatsoever. There were just instructions received, which I carried out. And that's probably one of the reasons he preferred to deal with me, because I didn't ask any questions. I just wrote it out.
One last question, ma'am. A lot has been said about Greater Diamond. Do you have any idea on what was their mission, how they came in, how they unceremonious?
Greater Diamond never really settled in. There was a lot of talk about Greater Diamond. They brought in equipment. The duty-free, according to the law, only the president actually can authorize duty-free unless you have a concession agreement. Duty-free to bring in all the heavy equipment was granted by the president. And there was one situation where he asked that the customs people go in to a certain office that they had and access the equipment that had been brought in. And that Greater Diamond were required to pay duty on it, even though the stuff had come in duty-free. I don't know what went wrong, but I was asked to send customs people in. And so when my customs people went in to access the equipment, I think they had all been taken out. And that was the only thing that I had with them, Greater Diamond.
Okay. Thank you very much for coming and responding to our inquiries and for providing the information that you had. Is there anything you would like to say before you leave, if at all? Nothing.
No, I think I'm fine.
Okay. So thanks very much, Ms. Kennedy.